First main reason why combat sports stand out among other sports is the culture of combat sports. People bring up a lot about how combat sports are great for building a work ethic, building character, toughening people up, and that's all true. And when people bring that up, they generally tend to point to aspects that are kind of intrinsic to combat sports. That you're getting punched in the face, or slammed onto a mat, or getting submitted, or other stuff that looks all painful and rough, and oh my god, he's bleeding. And yeah, that stuff can be hard sometimes, but I don't think it's actually the aspects that are intrinsic to combat in itself that make the culture of combat sports so heavily emphasize toughness and grit and work ethic. At the end of the day, I think you could build all of the traits that are built through combat sports to an equal extent, theoretically, through other sports. You could build it through basketball, you could build it through badminton, you could build it through bossa ball. I highly suggest you go look that one up. But for whatever reason, combat sports just happen to have a culture filled with a ton of people who want to watch you suffer, which is to say get in good shape, and who are going to push you in order to make you get tougher. And I suppose it's because of the intrinsic parts of combat sports that those kinds of people are attracted to combat sports. You know, it's not a soft little pansy who's like, you know what I want to do in my free time? Get punched in the face. This seems like a really good idea. And you also need to be a little bit insane, which kind of militates toward that kind of sadism where, you know, the coach who's been in it for 30 years and has a chip on his shoulder wants to make you do gut-busting cardio, which leads in the end to you improving. Or at least I hope it does. Then again, given some of the coaches I've had, sadism may be just enough of a motivation for them on its own. Another effect of the difference in culture is that because they just expect you to be tougher, just because of the kinds of people that are attracted to the sport, there's also a much higher baseline expectation of the kind of physical shape you're going to be in. You know, if you join a tennis club for a bunch of viejitos, then, you know, the expectation is that, you know, you're going to be hitting it around leisurely for a couple rounds, and you're like, okay, let me have a little water break. And if you're that out of shape in the majority of combat sports, you can kind of get away with in jiu-jitsu, if I'm going to be honest, but in the majority of combat sports, people will make fun of you, which is a very strong motivator for people to stop being couch potatoes. Another aspect that sets combat sports apart from most, but not all other popular sports, I will give it that, is that combat sports are, in the vast majority of cases, one-on-one sports. And, you know, all the benefits that you get from a one-on-one sport, you can get from any one-on-one sport. It includes tennis, it includes badminton, it includes ping pong. But the fact of the matter is, in a combat sport, you have nobody to rely on, nobody to look toward for help, and most importantly, nobody to blame for any loss, anything that goes awry, whatever, except for yourself. This is admittedly a lot to deal with. This is part of the reason why my mother sport, so to speak, folk-style wrestling, has a very high turnover rate. Not that many people join, and then a lot of people also quit. While the sport has been seeing bigger numbers in recent years, it's pretty understandable that it's not one of the more popular sports. In my experience, it's always the ones who take losses the hardest, that blame themselves the most, that feel the most like, I just didn't do good enough, and who, you know, take that complete and total responsibility for one's own actions and success as kind of a weight that they have to carry rather than a fun part of the game. Those are the ones who often end up burning out the easiest. Which is quite sad at the end of the day, because those are the people who, ironically, I would say most need to be thrust into that kind of demanding environment where they're reliant on nobody but themselves. Last but not least, combat sports are the ultimate ego crushers, even compared to other individual sports where you hold complete responsibility for any loss. For better or for worse, a lot of people, especially young men, which is the main demographic practicing combat sports, place a large part of their ego in being able to beat other people up. When I say being able to beat other people up, I mean imagining that they are able to beat people up, because it is only in their head. And when they step onto the mat, this reality becomes painfully clear. I began wrestling in 8th grade, and before I began, I thought of myself as the toughest motherfucker to ever walk the earth. I thought because I'd broken a couple bones and gotten a bunch of other injuries, not from sports or anything, I didn't do sports before then, I was just a complete idiot. That made me the toughest guy on the entire planet, and nobody could ever hold a candle to how tough I was, so I was just gonna walk through all of my opponents in wrestling because I was so tough. Reality then proceeded to bend me over the table and bang me raw, as I did not even make it the whole way through my first wrestling practice because I had to stop halfway because I banged my head and couldn't see straight, and also I was super gassed and I had no clue what was going on, and where mommy? And I think that this, at the end of the day, is one of the main reasons why combat sports aren't really that popular for people to practice compared to other sports. Some are very popular when it comes to people watching them, but they're not nearly as widely practiced as the, starter pack sports like basketball and football and blah, 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 track, because it takes a lot to bounce back from that absolute, complete grinding into the earth of your ego. If I hadn't been too proud and too egotistical to admit that I wasn't tough enough to handle wrestling, because I really wasn't at the time, I would 100% have quit, cut my losses, run, never mentioned wrestling again, and I would never have made it to high school where I eventually really fell in love with wrestling when, I became just a little bit more of an adult and realized that I didn't need to be the toughest guy on planet Earth. So at the end of the day, while I do think that a lot of combat athletes do kind of glaze themselves and their sports just a little bit too much, given that you can improve, in theory, just as much with any other sport as you can with combat sports. Granted, with some you may miss the individual responsibility aspect, but, that's another thing. These factors that I previously mentioned contribute towards combat sports being a particularly ripe environment for building really mature and well-rounded athletes and individuals.